first, we begin with Brexit tonight, because you might never have heard of UK Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, but yesterday he put himself in the eye of the Brexit hurricane by announcing that he was ruling out a third vote on Theresa May's Brexit deal. Well, the UK PM must now come here to Brussels on Thursday to ask for a Brexit extension and hopes that she finds EU leaders in a forgiving mood. But this morning, EU affairs ministers all sounded a little impatient. Let's take a listen.
The clock is ticking and time is running out, and we are really exhausted by these negotiations, and I expect clear and precise proposals of the British government why such an extension is necessary. It's not just a game, it's an extremely serious situation.
Our clear preference is not to have no deal. We would certainly prefer having any agreement, but we think it's not really our choice at this stage.
Well, even German Chancellor Angela Merkel sounded a little confused about Brexit this morning, confessing that she wasn't aware of 17th century British parliamentary bylaws. But she knows, as everyone else does, that time is running out. Take a listen.
Ich werde bis zur letzten Stunde der Laufdauer des 29. März dafür kämpfen, dass wir noch zu einem geordneten Austritt kommen. Und da haben wir nicht viel Zeit, aber immer noch einige Tage Zeit. Und ich sehe mich jetzt zu dieser Stunde außerstande, irgendwie zu mutmaßen, wofür ich am Donnerstag sein werde, weil das unglaublich davon abhängt, was wird Theresa May vorbringen, wie sieht die Situation aus, was passiert noch im Parlament. Darauf werden wir adäquat und auch gemeinsam als 27 reagieren. Und je weniger jeder sozusagen seine Vermutungen äußert, umso einfacher ist das.
Okay, let's first go to our correspondent, Vincent McAviney in London. Vincent, I mean, yesterday we had Speaker of the House, John Bercow, ruling out a third vote, but it seems that Theresa May, she hasn't given up yet, has she?
Good evening, Tessa. That's right, she hasn't given up. There are just 10 days to go until the UK leaves the European Union, deal or no deal. But it isn't the way the Prime Minister thought these days were playing out this week after John Bercow threw that spanner in the works yesterday. So at the moment, she is writing a letter to Donald Tusk asking for an extension until the 30th of June, but possibly with more time. And apparently, Cabinet got pretty heated this morning because the Prime Minister wouldn't actually say how much time she thought was needed. She just needed the room for manoeuvre. And Andrea Leadsom, who is a strong leaver in the government, said it was now a Cabinet of Remainers and criticised going beyond that date of the 30th of June. Now, what the Prime Minister is also contending with, and her backroom staff are poring over, obscure parliamentary process. As Angela Merkel was saying there, she's not aware of the rules from the 17th century, and I think those working inside Downing Street as well are poring over them to try to figure out what would be the substantial changes needed to have that third meaningful vote. Here's what the Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay had to say about that.
So there are a number of rulings that we need to look at, but it is the case that the Speaker's ruling yesterday raises the bar, and we need to see what is different as we approach the next vote. And clearly, if members of Parliament themselves are changing their vote, that does suggest that circumstances have changed.
Now, there's lots of talks from experts about putting things down like a paving motion or even proroguing parliaments, which means ending this parliamentary term, starting a new one, possibly even having to have a Queen's speech and then bringing the vote back then. That is all the procedural side of this, though. For Theresa May, she also has to focus on saying to the EU that she has enough of a plan once she gets past all of that, that this extension needs to be approved. And that is not clear at the moment because she also needs to get on board all of those MPs that she's been working on from her own party, the ERG group, the DUP and even some Labour MPs to get her deal over the line, because it's unclear at the moment whether or not she can do that. And there are reports today that around 20 of that ERG group who have still voted against Theresa May's withdrawal agreement at the last chance and are saying they'll vote against it this time round, are talking about actually wanting possibly that delay because they would go on strike. They wouldn't vote through any government legislation in an attempt to try and bring down Theresa May, replace her with one of their own number or someone sympathetic to them and try to have a different kind of Brexit. So it's an incredibly confusing picture here for Theresa May, and it's little wonder that leaders around Europe are watching on, unsure of what's going to happen, because Theresa May, frankly, is pretty unsure herself as she heads to that EU Council meeting later in the week.
Thank you for that, Vincent McAveney there in London. Yes, confusing indeed. And Dan, we were talking before we went to air, and you were saying if it were up to you, you just want to leave. But now Theresa May, it looks like she's going to ask for an extension. But the question, as Vincent was saying, is how long? What is your reading on this?
The basic problem is that when MPs decided to put this question to the people, it never occurred to them that they might get an answer that they didn't like. And so for 2.5 years, we've had this Westminster crisis of MPs trying to wriggle out of the promises that they made about implementing the referendum result. I mean, I know it's easy to slide into saying Britain is in crisis. Britain as a whole isn't in crisis. You know, we've best unemployment figures we've ever had. The stock exchange is booming. Exports are up. You know, consumer confidence is up. But there is a Westminster crisis caused by this absolute refusal to do what MPs
the pound isn't doing
do.
very well, is it? Anyway.
Well, in general, though, I mean, given the predictions that we were given during the campaign and given how it's actually worked out, I think it's pretty difficult to argue.
It is the best performing currency against the dollar this year, apparently. So there is some belief in the system. I think in part, though, you know, you're right. Westminster and politicians certainly did not expect the results. However, it wasn't terribly clear that even though Britain voted to leave the EU, in what fashion it would do so, under what circumstances. And that was a democratic mandate, but that the Parliament's deciding how Britain should leave on what terms, was elected, yes, on a manifesto, both for Labour and the Tories, that they would leave the European Union, but they were elected in 2017. They've got a far more recent mandate than even the referendum.
Yes, but they were elected on the basis of a very clear, in both cases, Labour and Conservative, very clear manifesto promises to uphold the referendum. And they are now trying to wriggle out of that promise, which is the basic problem.
Well, yeah, of course, but representative democracy, you know, politicians do wriggle out of manifestos all the time. I think people voting for people like Ken Clarke were in no doubt that he was a Brexiteer.
He was the only one. He was literally the only one who didn't vote to do it.
Yes, but there are many different versions of Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn has his Brexit. Theresa May has hers. We have the Malthouse Compromise. No matter where you go, there's somebody with their particular version.
But that's the problem, isn't it?
It seems to me that is the problem, that there cannot be agreement on a Brexit that the majority of people can back. And I mean, one of the questions I wonder about when I look at the House of Commons is, does anybody talk to anybody else? John Berco's statement came as a bombshell. Theresa May did not know that her own Attorney General was going to give that advice.
I do wonder,
but I mean, I just find this incredible, what's happening. And whether it takes some kind of cross-party initiative or whatever, it needs to come, because politics has to get back to the business.
Well, one thing that is clear is that this deal with the backstop is not going to go through. I mean, now John Bercow has said, you can't run the same question again. So either there is a substantive change, which the EU says...
Why are you not sure? Why?
I thought perhaps over the weekend that there might be 20-25 Conservatives would vote against, but she may get that number of Labour to support. She may not. I'm only saying...
I really don't think. But in any event, it's now been ruled that they can't put the same question again.
Specifically, absolutely. But I believe there are many ways.
I mean, I think there were compromises available in the immediate aftermath of the vote that would have reflected the narrowness of the result and would have minimised the friction of Brexit. I argued before, during and after the campaign for a kind of EFTA-type deal that would preserve large parts of the single market, but would opt us out of the political institutions. The trouble is that this deal does exactly the worst of all worlds. It keeps us in the customs union but outside the single market, which no one would have. I do want to ask about
the European election, because this is what the rest of Europe, they're very interested in looking at, because they don't, I mean, it's very unclear how it's going to pan out. So how would, as a leaver, you want to get out of this, but does it make sense for you to run again and get people to vote again in this, if you want to leave anyway? It just doesn't make sense.
Of course, I'd much rather not have the election.
But
I'd much rather not have it on political grounds and on personal grounds, because I've arranged my whole life around the basis of going on to do other things. So, of course, we should honour the result of the referendum and not hold the elections if that can be done. But if other MPs either overturn or prolong the Brexit issue, then that's going to be on them rather than on me. And the idea that Brexiteers will be blamed rather than the people actually doing the delaying is crazy.
So Brexiteers will run again, in this sense?
Do you know, it's a personal as well as just a political judgment that I think that not standing if there is an election would look like desertion under fire, and worse than that would be desertion under fire. So I may have to, although I have to say it's a thundering pain because there are lots of other things I'd rather be doing.
I just think the way you describe it, desertion under fire, is not a good way. There's nobody challenging you in that way. But I do understand what you say, because you'd wonder what contribution you could make here. Why would you be elected? So I think perhaps some mechanism will be found if Theresa May can show any kind of clear plan and pathway, that maybe some mechanism will be found.
I think the concern here, or why some Brexiteers may well support a long extension, potentially 2 years, is you reset the clock, and that ultimately the Conservative Party gets rid of Theresa May. This is in an ideal Brexiteer world. They get someone who is much more sympathetic to
just much more competent. It's about competence rather than about ideology.
But then uses that leverage as a continuing full member of the European Union with the ability to be enormously disruptive if they so want, and that they can secure
Do you agree with that?
No, I mean, I don't think there'd be any plan to come here and be obstreperous and difficult. But what I do think is a fair point is, as far as I can tell, a lot of the people pushing this long delay really do see it as that. They don't see it as a way of cancelling Brexit. One of the conditions being mooted is that Britain wouldn't veto or involve itself in the next budget round that begins at the end of 2020, because we wouldn't be there. So I think, frankly, if we can get a good Brexit next year rather than a bad one this year, that's
there is concern about that in Brussels, though, if they give an extension.
Have a crash out and no deal.
All right.